You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. My name is Troy Singer. I'm here with my good friend, Bart Kaler. And Bart, I feel that we haven't talked a lot recently because you have been on a plane continuously.
Yeah, I've been traveling a lot. This first quarter of the year has been quite the whirlwind. So it's good to spend some time with you today.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad for this podcast because we have to come together today.
That's right.
And interview wonderful guests. What our conversation today is how journalism shaped two marketing leaders in higher ed. Today's guests are Julia Ferrante of Middlebury College and Rachel Colquitt of South Piedmont Community College, two seasoned higher ed marketing leaders whose careers began not in enrollment or public relations, but in the newsroom. And Bart, as they say in the episode, they recently reunited after 20 years at the ANA conference.
Yeah, that was so much fun. It's a fun story to hear that. So, I know that Julia, they both serve as vice presidents of marketing at their respective colleges. Julia's at Middlebury and Rachel's there at South Piedmont. But I really liked the fact that even though their campuses are different, the roles are different, the fact that they were able to reconnect and also recognize there's a lot of consistency in higher ed. There's a lot of things that we can share back and forth. And I love the fact that they kind of reflect on their journalism careers and talk about how that applies today in higher ed and how those skill sets can be learned. And they really go into some of that today. It's a great episode.
Yes, and I think there's a lot to learn for our listeners from that expertise that they are willing to share. With that said, Bart, here's our conversation with Rachel and Julia. Julia and Rachel, we always start our conversations out by asking our guests to really think about this deeply and give us something that you may have learned interesting or surprising recently that our audience might find meaningful or fun. And Julia, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Okay, well, two things come to mind. Being in Vermont, I learned recently that we spend about $70,000 a year on maple syrup in our dining halls. And that would be real Vermont maple syrup, which is the only maple syrup anyone should ever have.
That's a big budget item, but I'm sure that is great for student retention. And Rachel, what do you have to give us?
I thought long and hard about this question because I hear it on every one of your episodes, and I actually have a 4-point answer. One, we recently built a house, and I learned to be very patient. You know, there were times when I felt like it would just never get done. So I learned, again, the lessons of patience. Two, I recently learned to go up and talk to people at conferences, even if you haven't spoken to them in like 20 years. That's why Julia and I are here. So, take a chance and say hello. Three, I recently started taking pottery classes, which I haven't done since high school. And I've learned about how if you make a teeny tiny change at the bottom of a vase, like it changes the whole trajectory of what you're making. And I think there's some life lessons for that. And I actually forgot my 4th point. So I think that basically you could sum all that up, take a chance, try new things. Oh, no, I remembered it. My team and I, we're putting on an event. We're putting on an event to promote our HVAC program, and we've hired a band to create an original song for this event. Wow. And it is incredibly awesome. And so I would say, to sum all that up, talk to people you haven't talked to in a long time, try new things, and be patient.
Very fun. That's great.
That's a great answer, Rachel.
Thanks. I practiced that for weeks, Julia.
I feel like mine was just like, like the last 10 minutes or something.
No, that was good. Yours was more.
No. Both of you came through very well, so thank you. But we're going to talk about the topics that we said we were going to talk about, and that is journalism's influence on higher ed marketing. Now, both of you in the past have made a transition from journalism into higher ed marketing, and we would love for you to tell us what drew you to the sector. And Rachel, if you don't mind, we would love for you to go first.
Right. Well, so that's how Julia and I know each other. We were both employed at the same newspaper a long time ago. She was a reporter, and I was at that time weekend obituary clerk. That was my first job. And what drew me to newspapers was I love telling people's stories. I love talking to random people about being a librarian or why they became a nurse or whatever the case may be, and telling those stories. And so that's why I got into journalism in the first place, just being really fascinated by people and wanting to tell the story of the regular person that might not otherwise get told. And newspapers declined over time, as we all know, and I had the opportunity to go work for my local community college. And at the time, the vice president of communications who recruited me said, there's tons of stories to tell here at the community college. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And I've found in working in community colleges just a sense of purpose and passion that I don't think I ever would have gotten out of newspapers, because I really, truly believe in the mission of what we do and the second chance that we provide to people. So now I tell the story of people who go to community college. So.
That's awesome. Julie, how about you? What drew you into making the transition?
So I was a reporter for 15 years, and I worked at 5 papers. The third one was the Ledger in Lakeland, where Rachel and I met. And I absolutely loved being a journalist. And what drew me to that was that I love to write, and I thought maybe I'd get to travel. And the second part didn't really come to fruition through my journalism career. But I love kind of finding that sort of odd angle, interesting the interesting stories to tell, kind of giving voice to the important issues that people need to know about, maybe didn't know that they needed to know about. Right. And I thought I knew I needed to make a career change with all the changes in journalism, with the decline, the cutting of positions, the shrinking of newsrooms, and the cost of print, and just the internet. So, when I became a reporter, there was no Google. We still looked up laws in textbooks, and I would call police stations and say, what's the maximum sentence for this charge? If I was covering cops that weekend. But what drew me to higher ed, I come from a higher ed family. My father worked he was an administrator and a professor for over 50 years. And he was actually the vice president for academic affairs at URI for 17 years. And then he retired and then took another job at New England Tech for 12 years. And so he was a huge influence. And my mom is a retired English professor. So I came from that background, and I was comfortable around professors. And so having that license to ask people anything that you want to know was not, it wasn't an uncomfortable thing to do in higher ed for me. But what really drew me to higher ed was that I knew if I left journalism, I needed to be in a profession where there was a greater good, and where I felt like I wanted to tell the stories, and that there was something we were doing that was worthwhile.
That's great. Whenever I'm talking to institutions about their marketing department, they've got either new job openings or things like that, I'm like, hire journalists. They understand how to tell stories. They can do so many more things. And so I've had a lot of journalists on my teams over the years. And so what are one or two journalism skills that you each feel like you are applying on a daily basis? That one you might be doing, but you might be saying, hey, if you're new into the higher ed marketing area, these are 2 things that you should pick up and really be trying to do. So, Rachel, what would you say is your 2 skills you're using a lot?
I would say number one is that I sit in a lot of meetings and there's a lot of incredibly smart people, but sometimes there's really obvious questions that have not been asked and have not been answered. And I think as a former journalist, I wear that background I have really proudly. And it's like, ask the question that probably maybe people are just completely overlooking, right? Like, even if it might seem dumb like that, if you have that question, a lot of people have that question. And so just not being afraid to ask questions and put people on the spot, because you know, in the world of education, people get so in their silos. I mean, I'm almost sick of hearing that word, but like, we are very much in our silos, and we all just kind of like eat and breathe the same language and every day. And it's like, if you take a step back, like, does this make sense for the average person? Like, does this make sense what we're doing? So asking those questions. And then, you know, and I listen to your podcast religiously, and I'm very well aware and very involved in the acceptance of AI and adopting AI, but just being able to talk to human beings as a human being and understand their situations and tell their stories in a way that I don't believe computers ever will, as well as human beings. So being able to be empathetic and carry on a conversation in a way that helps other people open up to you, because that's where great stories are.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that you talked about both of those are relationship oriented. I mean, being willing to ask the hard questions, that's a courage thing. That's a relationship thing. And then being able to really do that with a human empathy, and being able to do that as a one-to-one in real life, kind of analog type of things. So Julia, how about you? What's a skill that you're using on a regular basis that's from journalism?
I mean, all of them. You know, I mean, every day I use my journalism skills, but I would say the top ones are, you know, the ability to put people at ease, or just to kind of really listen to what they have to say, and then question your own assumptions about what people might be thinking. Lots of times we try to make decisions based on what we think people want or need. And then when we talk to them, we find out there's a lot more to the story. One other skill that I used this week when I was putting together a budget presentation was research, you know, just reporting and finding out, okay, I think we need this for my department, but what are the benchmarks? You know, what are other colleges our size doing? Are we a small college? Are we a medium college? And what's my rationale for saying we're somewhere in between? But really kind of honing in what are the compelling facts? What are the showstoppers in a persuasive presentation? And all that really is grounded in journalism.
So to the both of you, how has your journalism reporting background shaped the way that you approach things in higher ed, like the brand voice and media relations, or even maybe institutional storytelling? And Julia, if I may ask you to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the central question I always ask myself or others is, how will this be received? And what will people hear? Not just what do we think we want to say, and then just kind of also kind of being grounded in transparency, like what is the most truthful thing we can say while also putting our best foot forward. So the question that I always have in mind in my work is, how is this going to be received? So it's not always about what we say or what we want to say, but it's what people hear. And we have to always think about kind of, is that going to be cringy or insulting, or is there a hidden meaning that we don't want to convey? And so I think in thinking about communicating who we are to the outside world, we have to think about not just the things that would be nice to say or sound good to us, but really who we're talking to and what they will hear.
I would add on to that by saying that when you think about what we do every day in our roles with our journalism background, I mean, we really perform qualitative research every day. Every interview that we conduct with a student, every student story we post is a piece of qualitative research. And I think like that journalism background, wanting to that commitment to transparency. We're always, seeking the truth. To me, it's really important that everything we put out there be rooted in some authenticity and the authenticity of the institution and in the truth that we're discovering every day about why our students come to us, what value proposition they're realizing at the college. And I try to root everything that we're doing in what we're actually hearing from the students. And so you could easily kind of come up with something and put it out there, but it wouldn't be the real day-to-day experience of the student. So trying to always reflect the actual student experience and everything that we do is something that I'm really committed to. And also, I've read some things recently about the need to be not always perfect in your communications, but authentic. And so, like, an example is in our internal communications to employees, which has been a big emphasis on my team in the last several months. Sometimes we mess things up, but like, we cop to those mistakes. We put out a correction. We say, hey, in our last student newsletter or last employee newsletter, we got something wrong, but we're still trying to provide you the information. I think people, they respect that and they appreciate that. Hey, you're pushing for us. You're trying to get us the information we need. And sometimes you mess up. And so that's something that Julia and I remember, that feeling of having to do a correction. But I still approach the work that way. If I mess something up, I'm going to tell you I messed it up, but I'm still working for you. So
I love what you're saying there, Rachel, because I think that you and Julia have both kind of touched on that authenticity, that truth, that being able to do that. And I love the fact that you wove in the idea of qualitative research happening every day. I think that's what a lot of times we miss in the marketing department. A lot of schools, we're just so used to kind of working down our checklist. I mean, if I hear the word ticketing another time, I'm just going to get tired. I mean, we're working down our tickets. We're doing everything that we're being asked to do. But are we really asking the why questions? Are we doing the journalistic questions, the who, what, where, why, and how and when? And so just trying to kind of work through that and making sure that we're doing those things in an authentic and truthful way. And you talked about AI earlier, and I'm just reflecting on the fact that, isn't it funny how correcting something could be the new flex for humans to be able to say, what, we didn't have that accurate. We want to rephrase that. We want to do that. We want to make a correction to that newsletter, and we're coming back on something because it's not AI. And so I think that's kind of exciting to kind of go down that path. So thanks for sharing all that.
We're going to change the conversation to leading change through brand and voice. And Julia, and I hope you don't think I'm picking on you, but I do know that you have led multiple institutions and have led communications at those institutions, and some of them had multi-division brands. So if you could let us know what you think it takes to keep voice, message, and values aligned across such a complex organization like Middlebury.
That's a really big question that's come up actually multiple times in our ongoing strategic planning. I think it's really important to get to the essence of what you're trying to say and not try to say everything there is to say. I'll give an example of a recent project we just launched. We call it Mid Stories, and it is really a sampling of all the things going on at Middlebury. So there might be a story about athletics, a video about our greenhouse, an essay by someone who has come up with the solution for daylight savings time. That's all his own. He does like a 30-minute adjustment to his schedule. So kind of a sampling of all the things that are going on, not everything. And one thing that came up in the strategic planning reports that I was just going through this week was that people want to know everything. And I would argue that they don't need to know everything. But I think, Middlebury is complex, but there's an essence there too. There's this commitment to strong academics. There's this close-knit community. I mean, you could say these things about a lot of places. There's also, we have a strong record of language immersion. We teach teachers. We have this beautiful a place that people come and really connect with. And so I think if you can narrow it down to the top 4 or 5 things that you want to say, it's important to do that, and that's much more effective than trying to say everything there is to say.
I like that. And I like the fact that you're talking about curation. And I think that's something that's going to be more and more desired as content becomes more prevalent. And I would argue that in some ways, knowledge becomes a little bit more of a commodity. And there's just so much of it out there that I think that the real skill set in journalism a lot of times is the editorial nature of journalism. The idea that I'm going to edit it down and get it into a sound bite or a sound bit that can be consumed. But what you're talking about there is even being able to curate those things. I mean, I think about like NPR's Weekend Edition or something where I'm going to curate a certain set of things that I'm going to share with you today. There's a ton of stuff out there, but we're going to talk about these things today. So I love that. And I think that's a really interesting thing that you're doing there at Middlebury, and a chance for other people to look at that and realize that, hey, curation might be something that could be really, really valuable. Rachel, I know in your work, you've been leading a mascot refresh there at South Piedmont. And so tell me a little bit about, as well as the community rebranding effort. So tell me a little bit about that, because I mean, as we kind of move from what Julia just talked about with some of the different ways of curating and doing the different types of stories and kind of looking at that special way that they're doing that, tell me the challenges that you're working through, the strategy behind, those aspects of the rebrand and the refresh. What lessons did you learn?
Well, South Piedmont Community College is one of the fastest growing colleges in North Carolina. But I feel like it's at this really interesting, it's only 25, 26 years old. It's at this interesting point in its history where I feel like it's been on such a growth trajectory, but maybe it hasn't stopped to reflect on itself and the special things the things that make it special. And so the team that I lead is a brand new team. We've been a team for about 3 years. And I think what we've been working to do, it basically are all the many things that we've done have come down to helping South Piedmont see itself in a new light. Like we have a different problem than Julia in that, like, we are still in the mode, we have to push to get stories, right? We know that there are amazing stories happening in every single classroom at our college, but it just hasn't been the culture to tell those stories. So like we're doing a lot of work to encourage the faculty and the staff and the students. Like, if you have a success story, tell us why you're here. Tell us the path that led you to this college. And so we're really like, that's a lot of what we're doing right now is incentivizing and pushing and just like digging deeper ourselves to get to those stories at South Piedmont. But the mascot that we did, going back to authenticity, it's hand drawn. We have an incredibly talented artist on our marketing team who hand drew the alligator mascot. Al the gator was inspired by an alligator that was actually discovered on one of our campuses in the 1990s. And so again, that authenticity, it's rooted in something that actually happened. It's unique history to South Piedmont. But again, a lot of people had known about that alligator, and the librarian at our college actually had written a children's book about it back during COVID time. But no one stopped and said, hey, we should celebrate this. Like, we should embrace this. This should be our symbol. And so that's the opportunity that my team has gotten the pleasure of seeing that come to fruition these last couple of years. And yeah, we introduced alligator as our mascot in August 2025. And on April 28th, 2026, we will be unveiling the actual mascot costume that we got made by a mascot designer that does a lot of work for the NFL. So it's been super fun.
Very, very fun. So both of you kind of just, described a little bit of, you talked about authenticity, you talked about different things, whether it's, bringing on a new mascot, doing some rebranding, whether it's kind of getting your community to kind of understand the idea of, being able to do shorter stories or whatever it is. I mean, how do you get buy-in? I mean, let's start first with how do you get buy-in? I mean, you guys are both from journalist backgrounds, and so pitching the story was a part of your background. But the same thing happens in marketing teams where, hey, I've got an idea, I'm going to pitch it to the team, we're going to make this happen. How do you earn the buy-in at that level? And then how do you push that up? How do you get the buy-in, especially at the cabinet level? Talk about that for a moment.
I don't know who said it. It might have been Julia, actually, at the conference where we were united. But the phrase that I've been leading my team with and living by myself is market the marketing. That's been the phrase I've been really using a lot in the last several months. And I think, marketing, it's so easy in the world that we work, in, for marketing to be seen as, well, they just put stuff on Instagram. They just do. Yeah, you just make this flyer look prettier. We drive enrollment. We manage the reputation. We're responsible. My team, at least, is responsible for internal communications, external comms, the whole everything, right? And it's super important not to lose in that story, not in that work, not to lose your own story. And so we report out all the time about how many leads we're generating, how many of those leads are applying to the college, how we're increasing web traffic among specific populations and demographics, our social media growth. So market the marketing, let people know what you're doing, because it's very easy for them to see you as just, they make flyers pretty.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that you really have to talk about your work and show it and let people poke holes in it. I mean, we do that to people all the time. We say, like, what do you want to do? Okay, let me ask you some hard questions about this. This might be uncomfortable, but we need to let people share their ideas with us too. I mean, I just in putting together a presentation asking for more resources for our department, I showed it to people that I work with all the time. And I said, what do you think of this? And I got great ideas. Like, have you thought about adding more resources in this particular area? Like, do you have enough resources for digital marketing, for example, or just the poking holes in things and kind of letting our work, which will eventually be public, be seen before that happens. And I think that's something that we as journalists are really comfortable with. We're trained to be able to do. If we're not comfortable in it, we get a quick education. But I do think, like, not trying to hide away and do your thing and hope no one asks questions, but really socialize these ideas and talk about their importance. And I would say to, make sure you know what your goals are, set aside time to make sure you remember why you're doing things. And I do that a lot with my team too. When we talk about our work, I try to emphasize why we're doing what we're doing. Yeah. And then if it's a lot of extra work or it's different, I acknowledge the problems also, or say, I know that this is hard and I know that it's different from how we did it before, or it feels like more work, but this is why we're trying this. And if it turns out that it's not the right way, we can adjust, but let's try this.
Yeah, change is hard for all of us, and as leaders, we have to kind of help manage that change for our team, and we have to be able to put those things together. I really like what you said about remembering why we're doing what we're doing. Sometimes when I'm working with marketing teams, I'll ask them, hey, when was the last time you went into the CAF and ate with the students? When was the last time you took a piece into the CAF and said, what do you think of this? And get, you've got a real-time focus group right there available all the time. So take advantage of that, and that's going to help remind people why they're doing what they're doing. I love those. You guys are knocking it out of the park today. You guys are great guests. So perfect.
Let's talk about reconnection. I know that the two of you first worked with one another about 20 years ago, so would like for you to let everyone know, how did that come full circle, and what did it feel like to collaborate again?
I think Rachel should take that one because she spotted me.
Right. Well, so we worked in close proximity to each other 20 years ago when I was a weekend obituary clerk and Julia was a reporter. I can still remember where we both sat actually in that room.
Me too.
We didn't really work together though. We just happened to be there at the same, because Julia was doing real journalism. I was just typing up when people died. But I was still in college at the time. But any case, I did stay on at the Ledger. That was the newspaper where we worked. And I became a reporter and an editor and whatnot after Julia left to go do other things. But then we reconnected. Not really. It was very weird. We were at the AMA Higher Ed conference last November, and I spotted Julia from across the room a few times. And I was like, well, she's not going to remember me. I mean, that was 20 years ago. But then we both ended up at the same Italian restaurant in the line for the bathroom in Alexandria, Virginia. And I was like,
meant to
well,
be.
Julia, do you remember me? And she had nothing else to do since we were just both waiting for the bathroom. So we reconnected there. And then I messaged Bart. I was like, hey, I think there's a story here. And now here we are months later.
I love
But
that.
I think in talking to Julia in preparation for this podcast, it's just really interesting the same. While we've not been in touch, we've followed the same path, that transition from journalism, and now we're both in the VP position at our respective schools. They're different institutions, but I venture to say we probably have a lot of the same challenges. We probably have a lot of the same kind of characters on our teams. And so just that parallel trajectory that we've both experienced, and in talking to her about how we were both committed to the pursuit of a greater good, and we wanted to get up every morning and believe in what we were doing. And I know that we do that. I believe in the community college mission. I know she believes in Middlebury's mission.
Right.
And so here we are.
I think that's great. And Julie, I'd love for you to comment on this. Is just the idea that I've started my career in corporate. I mean, consumer electronics is what I did a lot of work in, and just all kinds of worked in an agency, and so we did all kinds of work. But one thing that's interesting about higher ed is that even though there's a lot of competition, everybody shares. And everybody talks about it, because I think it goes back to what you said, Rachel, with that greater good. Everybody's in higher ed because there's a personal greater good feel. I mean, I was first generation student. I know Troy was, and so there's something in that about that. So just, Julie, as you think about how your story of kind of reconnecting and getting back together, and the fact that a lot has changed, but a lot is the same in higher ed, and you're sharing those things along the way. Why do you think it's so worth investing into those relationships, especially at these conferences? I mean, the authentic analog get back together in real life, that's what's going to be the new trend going forward. I mean, we're going to be so sick of AI fatigue that we're all going to want to get together. Why do you think, Julia, that it's so valuable to do that and to invest in those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say for the record that I recognized Rachel right away.
Fair enough.
I didn't spot her across the room, though, and I was so glad she said something. I mean, even, that we happen to be in the same line for the bathroom at a restaurant, so it, might have been awkward otherwise, but it was so great to reconnect, and we have this common history, and how great that we both ended up leading teams at these wonderfully different but places that have quite a bit in common, as it turns out. But I think that our reconnection speaks both to that grounding in journalism, but also the generosity of the higher ed community. That was something that I've been floored by, just the sharing of ideas, the recognition that there is a greater good. We're all in the same boat. We're tackling the same problems. I'm newly part of a group of vice presidents for communications and marketing at small liberal arts colleges, and we talk about, we don't give away state secrets, but we talk about things that we all have in common and how we're sorting through some of these challenges. But I think, being at the AMA conference was just incredibly renewing for me. I hadn't been to a conference in 6 years because of COVID and budget challenges. And so seeing Rachel and reconnecting and talking about our work and seeing other people who I worked with in higher ed in Pennsylvania as well was just so great. And there's no substitute for being in the room and talking about what we do. And you can talk to your colleagues and kind of get caught up in your own place. But it's just, there's just a real generosity of spirit that I think is everybody should be exposed to.
That's great. I love that. And before, I know we're getting ready to close, and Troy will take care of that. But I guess I have a question that I think about. There are a lot of people that might be getting burned out in their career, or they might be new to higher ed. I mean, I know you guys moved from journalism into higher ed, and they just don't know, what's going on. What would be anything that you might suggest that, what a new person into higher ed, what should they be doing? What should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking? Since you're journalists, what would be your recommendation?
I would say read a lot about the field of higher education. Obviously, there's many publications and newsletters you can sign up for, and then just people in higher ed love to talk about what they do. And so if you set up a meeting, I think there's just set up lunch with people on your campus and just pick their brains, learn about what they do, and they'll be glad to. So going back to the generosity of spirit, I will never forget the VP of Academic Affairs and I forget his title, but he was in charge of institutional excellence at the first school where I worked. And those two people taught me so much about higher ed, having just come from journalism, and they entertained all of my, I'm sure, mind-numbing questions. But, when you're not familiar with the language and the issues and, what does FTE mean and all that sort of thing, I remember specifically talking through that as a newbie to higher ed. And there were people, there is, I think, I've only worked in higher ed and journalism, but I don't think you're going to find that generosity in a lot of industries. People want to help. People want to teach. That's what we're here for. They want to teach you things. So, I mean, there's, again, this is the theme of the episode, I guess. But yes, all the AI is cool, but it doesn't compare to going and sitting down with someone for an hour in their office and just being a real person and being vulnerable in a way, just admitting I don't know something, and there's strength in that, and it will endear you to people if you admit that, and they'll want to help you. So
that's a great point, Rachel. Julia, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about advice for for burnout, just set aside time to plan, and make sure that you block off concentrated time in your schedule where you can actually think about what you're doing and not just sort of checking things off and making sure your inbox is below 600 or or whatever it is.
Inbox 600. So yeah.
That's my current goal. But also, I think just doing those things on campus. I mean, you mentioned it, Bart. I do eat in the dining hall. I go to theatrical performances. I've stopped by and look at art exhibits. We did a tour of the museum here a few months back, and the curator just took us around and told us all the backstories of the collection and why the curved wall never should have been built and things like that. But it's I think if you're thinking, the question I felt like was a little bit multi-part. So there was a piece in there of how do you break into higher education, or how do you become part of this world when you've done something else? And Rachel and I both had to imagine doing something different after being journalists for a number of years, and being a journalist is so much part of your identity when you're in it, and still is, I would say. But I think when I finally kind of cracked the code, I was looking at job descriptions and saying, all right, these are the things I can do. I can write, I can edit, I can do research, I can talk to people and conduct interviews. I know something about design and photography by osmosis. But just imagining yourself doing something different, and adapting, being open to change, and being willing to adapt and to support a new direction.
That's great.
Sorry, all of a sudden I have sun on my
on the burnout point, if I can add something, because that was something I do think it's super valuable to, when you get the chance to go and shadow other people on campus. So I'm the VP of marketing, so a lot of my time is spent in the marketing world, but I recently filled in for a recruiter who was out for a while, and I am still corresponding with one of the students that I took on a tour that day and that I helped through the application process. And she's texted me about how do I do the FAFSA or whatever the case may be, and she also texted me about I got in. She wanted to do the CNA program, and so just being reminded of it is easy to be in our own little world of social media, et cetera, but these are real people, and if you can connect to them, that helps with burnout. You're actually helping change someone's life.
Thank you both for being so generous with what you've given us today. But we're going to end by asking for both of you, if there's one final piece of advice that you would offer that would help our listeners grow as either higher ed marketers or communicators.
I would say not to get too lost in the AI transition, that you forget to be a human being. I was recently working with someone who was relying on AI to read his emails, and the AI agent that he was using neglected very important details, and he ended up missing an extremely important email because AI didn't tell him that meeting was happening.
Like turning your email over to an intern. That's scary.
Don't... technology is great, but we are still human beings, and this is very much a human business, and don't lose that. So maybe do an inventory of how much you're using AI, and if there's a little room to insert some more humanness back into your day-to-day.
I think I'm stay open to change. I mean, so recognize that the new thing is not the solution to everything, as Rachel, was thinking about AI, as Rachel was describing. It's absolutely true. Also staying open to trying new things. And we have a new president, and it feels completely different here in a really good way. I mean, and things were really good before that too. So different is not, it can be scary and unknown, but it can be really exciting too. And to, someone described strategic planning as a way to re-examine some of the things that were kind of left on the table, as we're not going to do that now. And it's a chance to kind of revive those old ideas. But I think just staying open to the possibility that, we can always, no matter what the circumstances are, take time to think about what we do and why we do it. And if there's an opportunity to adjust and change, or if there's a new technology that's changing our entire world, think about staying open to how that might create new possibilities. And then I guess I'm going to contradict myself, but also stay grounded in what is good and true.
Thank you both for bringing us to such a powerful close. Everyone, we've been talking to Julia Ferrante, Vice President for Communications and Marketing at Middlebury College, and Rachel Colquitt, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at South Piedmont Community College. And to both of you, starting out with Rachel, if anyone would like to reach out to you after this conversation or follow your work, what would be the best way for them to do so?
They can email me at rpleasant, pleasant, at spcc.edu, and LinkedIn, which is where Julia and I got connected after the AMA conference.
Great.
And I'm on LinkedIn also, or jferrante at middlebury.edu.
Very good. Again, thank you both for a wonderful conversation. Bart, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share before we close?
I do. One of the things that when we do our AI masterclass training, one of the things that we have a slide that's from the World Economic Forum, and they identified the top 10 skills to have for success in any job for the next 5 years. So next half decade, these are the top 10 skills you need. And you'd think that, there'd be all this AI stuff, there'd be all this stuff. There was only one element on that entire list. Number 6 was technical literacy. Everything else is what people call soft skills. It's empathy, it's listening, it's critical thinking, it's everything that journalists do, everything that marketers do, everything that we teach in our colleges, learn how to learn. Those are the things that are going to be the most valuable job skills. And what I loved about this conversation is that we kind of talked about 3 main things that are all in that realm, that idea that we have to have soft skills. We have to be humans first. I mean, Julia kept talking about the generosity of spirit, the idea that we need to really be able to share, and the fact that the two of them got back together, that proved that. I mean, that's something that they had that before. They're sharing that now in higher ed, and they were able to reconnect on that. I think the other thing we talked a lot about was authenticity and truth, and I really do believe that there's going to be this analog age that we're going to go into of everybody's going to desire less digital and more analog. dialogue, more in-person meetings. We're gonna be like, oh, do we have to do it with Zoom? Could we do it in person? And so I think that's going to be a big part of it. And I think the last thing, which what Julia or Rachel kind of led with at the beginning in her fun thing that she learned, was this idea of boldness, being able to ask people questions, be able to get out there and do something, take a risk, and have courage in that. And I think the idea of having that generosity, being authentic and truthful, and being able to be bold and courageous, I think those are some things that, as I walk away from this episode, are things that I'm reminded of, that what can I do to be more human? I mean, I am kind of known as the AI guy, but I do also really value how do I walk that fine line and using it as a tool, but still human, AI, human on whatever I do. And so love the conversation that we had today, Rachel and Julie. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. And to our listeners, want to thank you for joining us for another episode of The Higher Ed Marketer. Be sure to check out Bart's new book, Know What You Don't Know, wherever books are sold. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with a colleague and then follow us on LinkedIn at The Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We will see you next week with another great guest. Thanks, everyone.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.